Dalvin Cook is no longer a member of the Minnesota Vikings. Is Danielle Hunter next? We talk about that and a lot more coming up next on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravenswire here on this Monday, and we're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here with us, making us your first listen each and every day. We're free and available all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube. So be sure to subscribe for free, both in video and in audio form. No money involved. In today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We're back. It is Monday. We are continuing to grind it out until the start of the 2023 season, and we have a lot to get into today. As Dalvin Cook is no longer a member of the Minnesota Vikings. And in the first segment, we'll talk with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings about if Danielle Hunter could be next. Then in the second part of the show, we'll talk about DeAndre Hopkins with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans, as Hopkins is on a visit with the Titans, or was on a visit on Sunday. So we'll talk about how realistic it is that Hopkins ends up in Tennessee. Then Mike Debate of Locked On Patriots will be with us for the final part of the show. So we'll talk more DeAndre Hopkins because there is another visit in line for Hopkins there in New England. We'll talk about if Hopkins and New England could make a realistic pairing in that final part of the show. So without any further ado, let's first dive into our conversation with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings have undergone a little bit of a transformation this offseason with a couple of big names now no longer with the team. And here to talk about that with me and more is Luke Braun, the host over at Locked On Vikings. And Luke, we've seen Adam Thielen walk out the door, and now officially Dalvin Cook is the latest member of that offense. I know there were some rumblings maybe Minnesota could look to trade him. They tried. Nothing, though. They end up releasing him. And I know I asked you the same question when we talked about Zadarius Smith. That's another name that's no longer with the Vikings. What are you going to remember about Dalvin Cook in his time in Minnesota?
With Dalvin, the two things I think Vikings fans will remember. Vikings fans who are angry all the time and miserable will just remember him for being hurt. He had a lot of injuries over his time, and I think he really could have been one of the more premier backs for a little longer if he could just stay healthy. But then, he got a shoulder injury, and it changed the way that he ran. He had that ACL in his rookie year too that sort of derailed things. But for me, as someone who's not miserable all the time, I'll remember there are so many cool moments of Dalvin Cook breaking off a huge run or a break-off touchdown right when the team needed it the most. Like just this tide-turning kind of thing. There were a bunch in 2022. If you watched that crazy game against the Bills, everybody loved with those crazy. It was like a 17-point comeback kicked off by a breakaway Dalvin Cook touchdown. The Colts game, coming back from 33 points down, breakaway Dalvin Cook screen touchdown was what ended up tying the game, if I remember. That kind of stuff. There was one a game a couple years ago that you can still make fun of Peter Bukowski at Locked On Packers over 2020 Packers. They were the best team in the NFC. The Vikings were 1-5, went into Lambeau and won that game on a 4-touchdown Dalvin Cook performance. And they were cool touchdowns too. Like they were, again, screens juking and jiving around the field. Like once he was in the second level, anything could happen. It was always kind of, you get him into the second level, this could be housed if your safety's not on top of his tackling. And sometimes they weren't.
Yeah, and I know that with Dalvin Cook, you move on from him, and now you're relying on more inexperience with Alexander Madison, who I think has shown a couple flashes. I feel like, Luke, and tell me if I'm wrong, some Vikings fans are really in on Alexander Madison, other fans are really out. And it's very different-sided.
It's fantasy is I think where people are really torn on Alexander Madison because it's really hard to figure out what he's going to be. He was buried behind Dalvin Cook. You were never going to start him over Dalvin Cook. Some Vikings fans thought that he was better than Dalvin Cook. They're just straight up wrong. Don't listen to them. But he's now the guy. He's it's going to be more of a committee than it was with Cook, where it was just asinine to take Dalvin Cook off the field. And anytime you didn't you had a choice to leave him there, you would leave him there. With Madison, I think you can spell him a little bit more. You can get somebody with a little more speed or, a little bit more outside edge potential, where Madison's a little bit more of a straight up and down runner, and kind of mix and match those styles and do the committee thing some, but he'll still get 50-60% of the snaps if you ask me. And he's still he's very much the best running back in that room, but there are other guys with other skill sets you might want to use in other specialized roles. But for me, I think Alexander Madison took a big step in 2022, and we didn't get to see a lot of it, but in the times he did come in and spell Dalvin Cook, I thought that he ran a little less greedy. He was a greedy runner earlier in his career, and he didn't really have the burst and speed to really pay that out. He would take a run outside, but he couldn't get the edge. It just wasn't fast enough. But he's big. He'll bowl you over, and he's a hurdler, so he'll jump over you. He can break tackles that way, and I think he got better at finding the yards that were there and taking the yards that were there. And I think that's going to be really, really important for him as a 3-down back, being the guy that, hey, you know what, just get your 4 every single time. Just make sure you get 4 yards. If you break a tackle, you get more, great. But, don't take a 2-yard lost one for the 10-yard explosive.
Right. And I like Alexander Madison personally. I hope he does really well. And I think he will, especially with an enlarged role there in Minnesota. But Luke's flipping over to defense. Darius Smith already out. Danielle Hunter's the next talk now, as we heard last week, that there was serious interest around the league. And I know there's a lot with Hunter. Obviously, he had the injury situation in 2020, same thing in 2021. It's been pretty healthy outside of that, multiple-time Pro Bowler.
Yeah, he played the whole year 2022.
Right. So, 10-plus sacks, multiple seasons here. Where are these reports coming from, these rumors? And do you feel like there's a realistic shot that Hunter is moved before the season starts?
If I had to guess, I would guess that Hunter is not moved. I think somebody would have to really come in with a Godfather offer. The Vikings are not shopping Danielle Hunter. Teams are calling the Vikings about him. And that's a really important distinction. It's one thing when you say, hey, the Cardinals are shopping DeAndre Hopkins. That means that is a divorce. That's a situation that's not tenable, and they're trying to figure out how to get rid of him and get something back. With Danielle Hunter, the Vikings are trying to work out an extension with him. That situation is still very much in progress, ongoing. Who knows where it'll end, but that's an ongoing situation. But anytime you hear, hey, there's a contract negotiation happening and it's not 100% going to end in a contract extension, teams are going to go, well, hey, I'll give you a 2nd-round pick. What if we did that? But I think you have to come with a Godfather offer, an offer you can't refuse. I don't think you can come in and say, we'll give you, a 3rd-round pick and you take some of the contract. I don't think we do that move. And there is, unlike with Dalvin Cook or with Zadarius Smith, where those 2 players were not going to play on their current contracts for one reason or another. There is nothing really the Vikings have to do. They could sit there and just say, all right, Danielle Hunter, you're playing on your contract that you agreed to and you're in. And Hunter either sits out, takes $1 million fines, kind of, misses a whole nother year of his athletic prime, or eventually they capitulate, they come to a deal, but there is no need to trade him. But hey, yeah, we'll pick up the phone. If you want to offer me, 2 firsts and you're a team that's going to pick in the top 5, yeah, we'll listen to that. But I don't see teams coming up as high as they will have to come up to get the Vikings to actually agree to this. Danielle Hunter is a very important piece, especially with no Zadarius Smith. There's no edge rushers left at all that are serious starters if you get rid of Hunter. So it creates this glaring, horrible need for the Vikings. There already might be a need. You'd be like Marcus Davenport and guys. It'd be horrible. So if you want us to do that, okay, we'll listen, but you better pay the heck out of it. We're not doing this for a 3rd-round pick and a song.
Right. And you mentioned that's actually where I wanted to go next with you, Luke, is what is the outlook of the edge room, the outside linebackers, the pass rushers with Hunter there? You mentioned how big of a need it is without him, but with him, what does it look like?
It's Hunter and Davenport. And Marcus Davenport, I think, will do a lot of stunting inside, rush against guards a lot. And that's the way the Brian Flores, Bill Belichick style defense. I think you cover the Ravens, you probably have something similar, experience with something similar with all the Wink Martindale years. But there's a lot of stunting. So a lot of edge coming in and rushing the guard, and then the tackle kind of looping around or whatever. So you can have that as the primary strategy, but in terms of who starts, Danielle Hunter and Marcus Davenport, and then you've got a whole bunch of competition for the depth behind them.
The Vikings have made some big changes there, and maybe Danielle Hunter is next, but it would take a lot, so I'm not predicting any trade. But big shout out to Luke for hopping on for more on Luke's work. Be sure to check out the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up in the second part of the show, Tyler Rowland will be joining us to talk about DeAndre Hopkins and whether he'd be a good fit with Tennessee, so be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get into on Locked On NFL. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. And we're still in NBA Finals mode. I am a big Denver Nuggets fan, and hopefully they can get it done tonight on Monday night. And if you want to bet on maybe Finals MVP if the Nuggets win, is it Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray? You want to bet on the Heat to win the series, make it 3-1 comeback, you can do that too over at FanDuel, and you should do it over there because they have great promotions every day, and they have a very safe and secure app. You can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action in America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. We're back here, our second segment, Locked On NFL. Kevin Ostraker, your host, still here with you. We just talked with Luke Braun about Dalvin Cook and Danielle Hunter, but now we're going to be getting into DeAndre Hopkins with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans as we talk about how good of a fit it would be to bring D-Hop into Tennessee. So let's dive into that now. The Tennessee Titans are now involved in the DeAndre Hopkins sweepstakes. Here to talk about that with me, Tyler Rowland, the host over at Locked On Titans. And Tyler, I know there's been a lot of controversy in terms of veteran wide receivers coming into Tennessee over the course of their franchise history, but I think Tennessee could get a good one if they're able to bring in DeAndre Hopkins here. I mean, did you expect that once DeAndre Hopkins was released from Arizona, Tennessee will be one of the teams they got to visit with him? Did you expect Tennessee to be one of the teams to get a visit with DeAndre Hopkins?
I certainly didn't think that they would be one of the front runners. It was a bit surprising that that's his first visit, and and that first official news on a team that he's interested in comes out and it's the Titans. That was a bit surprising, but overall, and obviously I do the Thursday show of Locked On NFL, me and Alex Clancy, and we did a segment a couple of weeks ago on dark horse teams who could be interested in Hopkins when he was first released or right before. And I did mention the Titans, a little bit of home cooking there on the show, but it does make sense. There are a lot of key factors here. It's something that I talked about on the first episode of the week on Locked On Titans. There's familiarity, there's football, and there's finances. And with the familiarity, you have not only Mike Vrabel, who Hopkins has spoke highly of before and who they spent time together with the Houston Texans, but you have Tim Kelly. And Tim Kelly was the offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. He wasn't the play caller in 2019, but he was the OC. And Hopkins had 100 catches and 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. So they have two coaches there with Vrabel and Tim Kelly who have familiarity with DeAndre Hopkins and who may be able to get his buy-in, may be able to develop some trust. And then there's the football reasons. I mean, the Titans don't have any wide receivers. Listening right now to our listeners, name a Tennessee Titans wide receiver. Like, some of you junkies may be able to get a couple, 2 or 3, but people who don't care about the Titans on a daily basis, you could probably name what? Traylon Burks. That's it. A second-year guy who only played 11 games last year. There are 190 available targets in this offense for Hopkins. So even though it's a run-first offense and all of that, he's going to instantly become wide receiver 1 and get all the opportunities that he wants. And then financially, it's a no-state income tax state. The Titans play 7 games in Tennessee, 2 games in Florida, a game in Texas. I mean, double-digit games. He's going to have no state income tax on his game checks. And the Titans are in a situation where financially they have a ton of cap space in 2024 and 2025. They have $8 million salary cap now, but as a person who covers the Ravens, the Odell Beckham Jr. deal was a 5-year deal where they use 4 void years and soak up all the dead hit into the second year and just eat it. The Titans could do something like that as well as restructure contracts. So whether it be the familiarity factor with Vrabel and Kelly, the football opportunity, or the financial aspect, the Titans have 3 very valid reasons for Hopkins to be interested in them. And then, of course, on their side, like I mentioned, the wide receiver position is a disaster. So the Titans should definitely have interest in Hopkins from their side. So it does make sense if you look at some of the key factors that Hopkins could be looking for.
Yeah, wide receiver, literally an absolute need. It is the definition of a need right now in
Right.
Tennessee. And I think when you're talking about the offense, Tyler, there are a lot of people who are, I guess, wondering what is it going to be like for Tennessee in 2023? If they end up
Mhm.
adding Hopkins, how does that change the outlook of the entire offense, the entire season for the Titans this year?
Well, I mean, honestly, it does. It has to. I think one of the big things that I've been saying throughout the Titans offseason is they need to choose a path and commit. I've said this kind of corny phrase, but I really like it. If you walk down two paths, you only walk down the wrong one. And the Titans are trying to go young and trying to focus on their future. They're drafting the Titans have Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry on offense, and they spent two of their first three draft picks on a quarterback and a running back. So it's hard to sell to the fan base when you do that and then you don't go out and address wide receiver in any meaningful way. It's hard to look at the fan base and say, hey, this is the last year of the contract with Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill. We're doing a last dance, going all in with these guys in their last season. And then you spend draft picks on their replacement and don't get a wide receiver and add to the worst wide receiver group in the NFL. Like, are you really giving Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill a last dance chance to do something here and to make a run? No, you're not. So to me, the addition of Hopkins would be that move of, hey, we did all this stuff to set up because we thought we could do this. And if they bring in Hopkins and it slots everybody so much more effectively within the offense, if you have Hopkins as wide receiver one, taking all the attention, Burks can now be an explosive downfield threat with a physical go up over top of everybody catching balls. Like, if people remember that primetime game against the Green Bay Packers, that was the best game of the season for the Titans. Treylon Burks ended that game with a deep pass, about a 40-yard pass he caught on top of Jair Alexander for the Packers. One of the best corners in the entire NFL, gave him the too small sign. And it was one of those moments where it's like, oh, Burks can be that downfield threat. The Titans have an A.J. Brown-sized hole in their offense right now that keeps anybody from taking them serious. If you fill that with DeAndre Hopkins, and then you add Burks as your wide receiver too, and you let Kyle Phillips be the slot guy he needs to be, and Chigakonkwo can kind of be that versatile weapon at tight end. They made some improvements on the offensive line. Now you can at least look your fan base in the eye and say, hey, we're giving Tannehill and Henry a real shot in the last year of their contract before we move forward with our future and probably move on from those guys. So to me, it would be the Titans choosing a path. And not only are they committing to a path, giving Derrick Henry and Ryan Tannehill a real last chance, but they're giving their team an opportunity to actually win games. I would have the Titans at about 7 or 8 wins right now with how the roster looks. You add Hopkins, and I think with how bad the wide receiver group is for the Titans, I think an addition of DeAndre Hopkins would literally boost them up to 10, 11 wins as a ceiling.
Yeah, adding Hopkins opens everything up for the entire team, for the entire offense, and I think that's so huge. But Tyler, I want to ask you about the quarterback position. You mentioned Ryan Tannehill. Obviously, he's going to be pretty much like the guy in 2023, but you still have Malik Willis there. Obviously, there's been a lot of controversy as to what his future is entering his second season. They drafted Will Levis, as you talked about. What have you kind of seen and heard from all three of those guys throughout training or throughout OTAs so far as we head into training camp soon?
Well, Tannehill's been sharp, and the Titans installed a brand new offense this offseason, new terminology. They're going away from kind of the Shanahan style to more of like a New England Patriots style with multiplicity being kind of the focus. So it's a brand new offense for a lot of guys. That's Derrick Henry came in early. Tannehill's been involved early, and Tannehill has looked sharp early on. He's had some good practices in recent weeks where you could really tell, hey, Tannehill is miles above these other young quarterbacks. So I think any conversation of a Tannehill trade and letting Willis or Levis be the starter, I think that's going out the window with some of these practices. So Tannehill is kind of just being Tannehill and what you would expect from him. Malik Willis has made some true improvements. Malik Will, or I want to combine their names all the time. Malik Will Levis.
Right.
But Malik Willis basically had no experience taking snaps from under center coming in as a rookie into the NFL. With what the Titans do on offense, obviously there's going to be a big learning curve there. So along with, the mechanical football issues, Malik Willis had to get better with his operation, in and out of the huddle, wordy plays, getting guys to the line of scrimmage. And he's done that so much better this offseason. Is that enough for him to become a viable starter in the NFL eventually? I'm still very skeptical, but he has improved. He looks more comfortable, more decisive out there getting rid of the football. Levis is a rookie. Yes, he's much more suited for a pro-style offense, more familiarity with what the Titans are doing than Malik Willis, for example, in his first year. But Levis still has some mechanical issues. Touch throws can be hard. His accuracy has waned here and there. It's a lot coming at him at a really fast pace. I expect both of those guys to get better, but right now I think the big takeaway with the Titans quarterback room is Ryan Tannehill still reigns supreme.
Huge shout out to Tyler for hopping on, and for more on Tyler's work, check out the Locked On Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Still a lot to get to on Locked On NFL, so we'll be talking with Mike Debate of Locked On Patriots about more DeAndre Hopkins conversations. So be sure to stay tuned, plenty to get to on Locked On NFL. We're back rounding out Locked On NFL here on Monday. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you. Be sure to subscribe both in audio form and video form for free. And thank you, as always, for making us your first listen each and every day. We're a 5-day-a-week NFL podcast, so any NFL news, updates, analysis, we have it here for you. But let's now get into our final conversation, Patriot style. Mike Debate of Locked On Patriots will be joining us to talk about DeAndre Hopkins. Let's get into it now. Well, DeAndre Hopkins is certainly garnering some major interest around the league, and one of those teams is the New England Patriots. Here to talk about that with me and how realistic a DeAndre Hopkins and Patriots pairing could be is Mike Debate, the host over at Locked On Patriots. And Mike, I know with New England, they already have brought in some guys, Juju Smith-Schuster being one of those, but DeAndre Hopkins would add a whole nother element to this team. But how realistic do you actually think that a Hopkins and Patriots pairing is at this point?
Well, I would say it's realistic, but I wouldn't say it's probable. I think that's probably a good way to anchor these types of discussions when it comes to the New England Patriots. DeAndre's been very vocal about what his desires are, Kevin, and what he's looking for from his new team. He's looking for stability in the front office. The Patriots do have that, believe it or not. When it comes to guys like Matt Groh, Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft in the ownership box, you know you're going to get stable ownership, guys that are willing to invest in the good of the team. He also wants strong coaching. You're not going to find a stronger coach in the league than Bill Belichick. That's definitely a factor. Quarterback, I think there's a lot of people on two different sides of the fence when it comes to that. I happen to think Mac Jones is a little more adept than people give him credit for, but he's not going to be a top flight guy. So if DeAndre is looking to play with a top 10 quarterback, probably not going to be New England. And then there's contention. There's, the ability to contend for a Super Bowl. Is New England one player away? Yeah, I think the jury's still out on that one as well. My opinion is they're not just one player away from contending for a Super Bowl. So all of these are going to have to factor in. But ultimately, if it comes down to money, the Patriots can make this work. They're actually in a position to be able to make financials work for the first time in a long while. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. In terms of realistic, yeah, again, probable, but I guess the best way for me to put it would be, possible, but not probable.
Yeah, and I know that with this wide receiver group, Mike, right now in New England, adding Hopkins to any room, that's an addition in any room. But what would it look like for that New England group to have DeAndre Hopkins put in there alongside the other guys?
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, what DeAndre Hopkins would do is immediately upgrade this wide receivers core. You've got some savvy veterans on this team, guys like Devontae Parker, guys like Kendrick Bourne. They know how to get open. Devontae Parker is absolutely great at making, contested catches. Kendrick Bourne is a very skilled route runner. They've got a second-year wide receiver in Tyquan Thornton that can really burn anyone in the open field. This kid's got tremendous speed, but DeAndre Hopkins brings a football savvy, a high football IQ that this wide receivers team just does not have right now. And if you can add someone like him who's capable of making yards after the catch and being a tremendous route runner, aware of where he needs to be on the field at all times, that's a very good compliment to a newcomer like Juju Smith-Schuster, who is going to be their yards after the catch machine when it comes to wide receiving, maybe out of the slot, maybe seeing a little time in the perimeter, but ultimately DeAndre Hopkins elevates this wide receiver core, and it's going to give Mac Jones that type of veteran presence at the position that he hasn't had yet.
Yeah, and I think, would elevate any receiver group, any offense, and I think would elevate New England's offense tremendously. But Mike, what would adding Hopkins do to your outlook of the team in 2023 based off of maybe where you have them right now and then maybe what you think about when you think about them adding Hopkins?
To be honest with you, I don't know if it moves the needle as much as fans may think it's going to. I think the New England Patriots right now are going to go as far as their defense carries them and as far as their offensive improvements made by Bill O'Brien are going to carry them. This is a team that was not good at yards after the catch last year. A lot of upheaval, very little cohesion. These things seem to be working themselves out. You listen to guys like Kendrick Bourne, you listen to people like Mac Jones talk about the ability of Bill O'Brien to come in and really stabilize this ship has really been, I think, a breath of fresh air for Patriots fans. So adding someone like DeAndre Hopkins obviously elevates the veteran presence. It's going to give Mac a very reliable target, and I think it's going to make the offense a lot more interesting. But in terms of moving the chains and making this team from maybe a middle of the pack team to a contender, I don't know if it moves the needle quite that much.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot to talk about when it comes to the AFC East this offseason and kind of all the shuffling that is going on. New England, I think, you can never count them out with Bill Belichick at the helm, and I think they do have definite talent on their roster.
Mm-hmm.
But where do you kind of see them slot in? We had this conversation a bit earlier in the offseason. Like, now the draft is over. We're through most of the waves of free agency. Now teams are just kind of signing who's left. But where do you picture New England right now in the AFC East?
I think it's tough to picture them in the cellar. I think it's very tough to picture them at the top, but this is still a team that contended for a playoff spot last year, right up until the final day of the season. And that was with a disastrous showing on the offensive side of the ball. Some regression when it came to the defense and being able to play against top flight quarterbacks, top flight wide receivers, and a lot of coaching difficulty. And yet this team still finished 8-9, trying to contend for that last playoff spot for that final day in Buffalo. So for me, it's difficult to see so many prognosticators thinking this team is a 5-win, 6-win team. I think they're much better than that. I think they're much more well coached than that. And I think they've got better talent on both sides of the ball. Where the problem comes in for the Patriots is the AFC East has definitely increased its star power over the course of the offseason. Aaron Rodgers being added to the Jets puts them at a different level. The Miami Dolphins have added a number of great additions to this team. Jalen Ramsey on defense. And, you're looking at what this team can do offensively. And in the Buffalo Bills, in my opinion, still the class of that division. Until someone unseats them, going to be difficult for me to pick against them. So I think the Patriots right now have as good a chance as any. They could very easily finish in contention for that top spot. But I think for people to sit there and to discount this team as a 5-6 win team, I think is doing them a disservice.
Yeah, I agree. Again, you can never count them out with Bill Belichick at the helm. But Mike, you did mention something about Mac Jones. I wanted to ask you about him. As you said, some people are very out on Mac Jones right now.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not there, it seems like. What gives you confidence that maybe Mac Jones, again, might not be a top flight guy, but could be enough for New England right now?
Well, I think Mac brings a level of uncertainty to this quarterback position right now this year. But if you look at what he did in his first year with New England, and you look at what he did in Alabama, running an offense that's predicated on vertical routes, getting the ball out of your hands quickly, putting it into the hands of a receiver where only the receiver can get it, and then give them the opportunity to get yards after the catch. That's the type of offense that Mac Jones can thrive in. It also happens to be the type of offense that Bill O'Brien is so great at being able to coordinate. So for that reason, I do have confidence in Mac Jones to be able to bounce back and show that he is a quarterback that can play at a high level in this league. Mac Jones is not a top 10 quarterback. He's not going to be a top 10 quarterback this year unless there's growth that I haven't seen yet from him on the field. And bottom line, Kevin, it's possible. I mean, we've seen different things happen with different types of quarterbacks, different players before, where they kick it into another gear that we've never seen before. But right now, if we're looking at what I've seen from Mac out of the last 2 years, I absolutely expect a better output because of the presence of Bill O'Brien and because I think he has a better supporting cast around him this year to make things happen, not just with wide receivers, but the running game with Ramondre Stevenson and James Robinson, and that offensive line has upgraded as well. That is as big of a factor as anyone. They have to keep him upright and out of duress. If they can do that, Mac Jones can make the throws to make this team successful.
Big shout out to Mike for his insight on the Patriots. in DeAndre Hopkins, and check out his work over at Locked On Patriots, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in to our show. Be sure to check out our content tomorrow. We'll be back here with your Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.